A massive controversy has erupted over India's prestigious National Film Awards. More than 60 awardees have skipped the ceremony. This after an announcement that President Ram Nath Kovind would be presenting only 11 of the awards. In a statement, the President's office has expressed surprise at the last-minute protests, saying that the President attends all award functions for a maximum of 1 hour and that this was conveyed to the Information and Broadcasting Ministry. Several weeks ago, meanwhile, the awardees who skipped the event have expressed their disappointment, saying that they feel dejected rather than honored. These pictures you're seeing from the award ceremony today, in which the Information and Broadcasting Minister Smriti Irani was presenting the awardees. This is a posthumous award to Sri Devi and her daughters, going up to accept it with her husband Boni Kapoor. Well, Akanksha Swarup now joining us for more on that. Akanksha, this is a last-minute controversy?
Absolutely, Amitabh. This is a controversy caused at the 11th hour, but let's not discount the fact that, the recipients were informed at the 11th hour, and which is why they've been extremely disappointed. And they wrote a letter to the director of the film festival complaining about this. And they mentioned in their letter that the National Award ceremony is a very pristine ceremony, and it's expected to be a very unbiased affair. And why this hierarchy? They've questioned why this hierarchy has been brought in at the last moment during the ceremony, while the remaining, there are only 11 recipients who are being awarded, and the remaining 120 have been missed out by President Kovind. So this is, of course, very unfortunate, because on one hand, we have 2 posthumous awards going to industry veterans like Vinod Khanna and Sri Devi, and on the other hand, we have over 68 attendees boycotting the ceremony. This is just extremely unfortunate, and in the history of national awards, this hasn't really happened, where a majority of the recipients have decided to boycott the ceremony.
Akanksha, the President's office, though, has come up with a statement.
Absolutely, Amitabh. The press secretary of President Kovind rightly mentioned that the INB ministry was aware of the fact that President will only be attending the second half of the ceremony. And the press secretary was also quick in pointing out that this has always been the protocol since President Kovind took over the office, and that the INB ministry had been informed. He expressed his dismay over the fact that the INB ministry, which was aware of this change since a month, had not bothered to inform the other recipients, which of course are extremely crestfallen by this change of events.
Akanksha Swarup reporting from the newsroom. The other big story, domestic politics, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Congress President Rahul Gandhi are in Karnataka as part of their election campaigns in the South Indian state ahead of the May 12th Assembly elections. Addressing a rally in Kalburgi in the state, Prime Minister Modi minced no words in attacking the Congress for what he called disrespecting the Indian armed forces. Later on, the Prime Minister also addressed rallies in Bellary and Bengaluru. The BJP has lined up a galaxy of leaders, including Union Home Minister Rajnath Singh, to address public meetings in the next few days.
इतना ही नहीं, सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक के बाद हमारे वर्तमान सेना नायक, उनको कांग्रेस के एक वरिष्ठ नेता, उन्होंने यहां तक कह दिया कि ये तो गुंडे हैं, गुंडे। भाइयों बहनों, आपसे मैं पूछना चाहता हूं, इस देश में कभी भी कोई अनपढ़ व्यक्ति भी क्या कभी हमारे सेना नायक को, हमारी सेना को देश की रक्षा के लिए मर मिटने वाले जवानों को कभी भी, और मैं आपसे पूछ रहा हूं, क्या कभी भी कोई हमारे इन वीर सैनिकों को कभी गुंडा कहने का पाप कर सकते हैं क्या?
The president of the Congress party, Rahul Gandhi, also retaliating. He's countered the claims to the BJP's promises, saying that the party's chief ministerial candidate, Yedurappa, is clearly corrupt.
आप कर्नाटक में आते हो, आप भ्रष्टाचार की बात करते हो, मगर आपके स्टेज पर येदुरप्पा जी खड़े होते हैं। दूसरी तरफ 4 मंत्री जो जेल में जाकर आए हैं, आपने येदुरप्पा जी को चीफ मिनिस्ट्रियल कैंडिडेट बनाया है, येदुरप्पा जी जेल गए। आप उसके बारे में अपने स्टेज से क्यों नहीं कहते कि आपने एक भ्रष्ट व्यक्ति को कर्नाटक का चीफ मिनिस्टर कैंडिडेट बना रखा है?
Nishita Virendra now joins us from Bengaluru. Nishita, in the run-up to the May 12th polls, clearly no punches being pulled by both sides.
That's right. It seems like the accusations between Prime Minister Narendra Modi as well as Rahul Gandhi seem to be getting more and more personal. And with the Prime Minister addressing 3 separate rallies today, he started off with Gulbarga, that is Kalburgi now, and then he went to Ballari. And lastly, his address in Bengaluru will start any time now. The Prime Minister seems to have tailor-made his speeches for each of these regions. While in Kalburgi, he spoke about the freedom struggle against the Nizam of Hyderabad before the formation of states in 1956. And back in the 1990s, we had seen the BJP trying to stake claim to this freedom struggle, and the Prime Minister raking that issue up again. In Ballari, he's talking about how Sonia Gandhi, who had once contested from the constituency, had promised a relief package of around 3,000 crore rupees, but failed to deliver it once she won the elections from the region. Also, another standout factor is, of course, the farmer issues, the agricultural issues. It started off with Rahul Gandhi sending a tweet out early this morning where he said that Modi government had failed in giving the minimum support price to the people, to the farmers of the state, as many of the crops were receiving minimum support price that were even less than the production costs, whereas the promise was that it will be 1.5 times the market price of these crops. In retaliation, you are seeing Narendra Modi going on to state that the UPA government has really not done much for the farmers, and it is the Narendra Modi government that has benefited almost 22 lakh farmers in Karnataka alone through the minimum support price. So it has been going back and forth, considering that agricultural issues are one of the top priorities of the people of Karnataka. Governments like SM Krishna's government had fallen on its face for ignoring the farmers' woes, for ignoring the drought-related problems and focusing only on urban infrastructure. And Congress does not want to repeat that mistake again, and hence had waived off loans worth 8,165 crore rupees last year. But it seems like the issues are brought up once again as the election nears.
Nishita Virendra reporting from Bengaluru in the run-up to elections in Karnataka. 3rd of May is marked across the world as Press Freedom Day, but many argue and say that there is very little to celebrate. Increasing attacks on journalists and the alleged muzzling of the free press poses grave concerns. The 3rd of May is meant to celebrate the fundamental principles of press freedom, evaluating it around the world and defend the media from attacks. The United Nations Educational Fund, as well as the International Federation of Journalists, has released its report on press freedom in South Asia, and the findings are worrying to say the least. The International Federation of Journalists has documented 68 cases of journalists being detained or jailed in South Asia, with Pakistan leading the number. Between May 2017 and April 2018, 4 journalists have been jailed in India, 21 in Pakistan and 19 in Nepal. The Maldives jailed 11 journalists, whereas Bangladesh has put 10 behind bars. The report also lists instances of internet shutdowns in South Asia, which stand at 97, with India leading the list with 82. Pakistan is second with only 12 instances. Afghanistan remains the most dangerous place for journalists in South Asia. Between May 2017 and April 2018, 22 journalists died in the line of duty in Afghanistan, while in the same period 5 journalists were killed in Pakistan.
India had recorded 8 killings of journalists in those 2 elements, which I believe is quite high, given that there is no active war ongoing in India. Pakistan also, the situation is really harsh for the journalists. It is one of the most dangerous countries in the world for the journalists, because there is also the killings happening, the attacks on the journalists are happening, and all those countries, if you also look into the situation of impunity, there is a high degree of impunity in the crimes against journalists. So the killers of the journalists are scot-free, they walk free. South Asia probably as a region is the worst region for the press freedom, for the freedom of expression, and for the safety of the journalist, and it's sliding down.
Palki Sharma Upadhyay now joining us from our newsroom. Palki, India on that world list seems to have plunged since the records were initially maintained.
Indeed, but we also have to bear in mind, Amitabh, which reports we're looking at, and that is what has put a question mark on the credibility of these so-called surveys and research stories that come out. I'll give you an example of a Reuters report that was released just a few days back that apparently conducted a survey, but those surveyed and those spoken to were journalists of a particular shall I say, leaning, who were known anti-government journalists, and they said that they felt threatened, they felt ostracized, they felt persecuted under the current regime, and they were not encouraged to do stories that were critical of the government, which is all right. It is nobody's contention that all is well in the press in India or anywhere else in the world. But for an agency like Reuters, which is one of the oldest in the world and one of the most reputable, to come out with a report like this also further vitiates the environment and begs the question what sort of agenda-driven reports are coming out. So I think one needs to look at the larger picture. One needs to put all sides of the story out for us to understand what the status of press in India is and elsewhere in the world.
Talking about elsewhere in the world, we've seen over the last few days the situation in Afghanistan, and there journalists dying while they were covering stories has hit the headlines.
Indeed. In fact, that is something that has been highlighted recently. The Pulitzer Prizes came out, and some reports said that 3 journalists who won this prize in the last few years, by the time they received the prize, had left journalism. This is one of the most challenging professions. There was a report that came out a few years back that put journalists in terms of job security with janitors. So there are a lot of questions both in terms of the kind of wages they earn and the kind of environment they operate in, especially in situations like Afghanistan where there's very little security. So yes, those questions need to be addressed, and Afghanistan remains an example, interestingly, and unfortunately this incident coming just a few days before World Press Freedom Day, and we are paying a tribute here on WION to those 10 journalists who were killed in the twin blasts in Kabul.
Palki Sharma Upadhyay reporting from our newsroom. Well, in fact, let's just get you a news that is coming in. The decks have been further cleared for Indian pharmaceutical companies to export medicines to China. The Chinese ambassador to India in a tweet says Beijing is exempting import tariffs for 28 drugs, and that will help reduce trade imbalance between the two countries. The exemption also applies on all cancer drugs. The new policy is effective from the 1st of May. Siddhant Thibal now joining us from our newsroom. This seems to be an effect of that informal summit that the two leaders had, Siddhant?
Of course, the impact of that informal summit, but remember there was a trade meet, India-China Trade talks, which happened here in New Delhi when the Chinese Trade Minister came here and met his counterpart, and this meet happened before the NSA went to Shanghai, before the Foreign Minister and of course the Defense Minister went to Beijing, and before of course that informal summit. So that is the main deliverables at that trade meet. The Indian Commerce Minister had said that pharma is a major issue. There's a big trade deficit between India and China. the reason of this trade deficit is the fact that India imports a lot of stuff from China and is not able to export a lot of things to China. So to bridge this trade deficit, India had asked China to open up its pharma markets and of course the IT sector. We really don't know the updates on the IT sector because China hasn't said anything. But on the pharma sector, this development has come where the Chinese ambassador has tweeted that 28 medicines can be imported and there will be no tariff on that. And he, of course, welcomed it, saying the fact that it will, of course, it's a big good news for the Indian pharmaceutical industry and medicine export to China. And I believe this will help reduce the trade imbalance between China and India, which, of course, I was talking the big trade deficit between India and China. There have been other issues also. Doklam is one issue which happened last year, but trade deficit was an issue which was long-standing and it was discussed in almost every meeting. But now it seems there has been a meeting of mind and this decision has been announced by the Chinese ambassador here in New Delhi.
Siddhant, you were mentioning the trade deficit between India and China, which has been of concern. It's been completely in their favor, like it is with all other countries that China exports to. Another issue that probably is bringing India and China together is the global situation with the US threatening tariffs on Chinese goods and the Chinese saying they would reciprocate as well. So in a sense, this is India and China coming together, even though it's just for these pharmaceutical products.
Well, many analysts were saying that this informal summit which happened between the Indian Prime Minister and the Chinese President was a direct, it was an impact because of the Washington and Beijing tiff. And of course, both India and China have, it seems they have finally come together and the first thing they have done is that decision on pharma. But it will take a long way. We also saw those visuals coming from May Day on 1st of May when both the armies had pictures released of they engaging on May Day, and of course there were reports of establishment of a hotline, but it will really take a long way. Today there was this MEA briefing and of course a question was asked on India and China coming together in Afghanistan, because that of course was one of the key deliverables from that summit which happened in Wuhan. So there was no direct answer, but of course the MEA spokesperson said that there will be an economic project expectedly in which India and China will both collaborate, and he gave an example of a solar project. We really don't know what will be the final nitty-gritties, but this is where India and China would like to collaborate, especially in Afghanistan, especially on the issue of trade.
Siddhant Sibal, thanks for updating us on that breaking story. India and China pharmaceutical products now will be allowed and without any tariffs.